The new Dodge Charger might be the most important car Dodge will ever build, and yet it makes no sense. A single model that is going to be sold as both a sedan and a coupe, and will feature both a gas and an electric powertrain. But this shouldn't come as a total surprise. Dodge's parent company Stellantis is in pretty big trouble, and the old V8s that made the last generation car so infamous are no longer going to fly. So the question at hand is, will this new Charger usher in a new era of success for Dodge and Stellantis, or are the Charger's best days already behind us? Now, it is impossible to get into any serious conversation about the Charger without first touching on the history of this nameplate. The very first generation of the Charger came out back in 1966, and then the Challenger came out a few years later in 1969. These cars were in direct response to the explosion in popularity of the pony car segment that had been kicked off by the Mustang a few years before. They featured sleek, elegant designs and powerful V8 engines. But the fun here would be pretty short-lived. With the fuel economy, emissions, and safety regulations that rolled out in the 1970s, these models changed dramatically. The second generation Challenger was basically a rebadged Mitsubishi, and then the model was discontinued altogether. The fourth and fifth generation Chargers might have made the biggest pivot in all of automotive history, with the fourth generation being a big luxury personal coupe, and then the fifth generation being a front-wheel drive subcompact, and then the Charger just got cut altogether. Despite their relatively short-lived glory, the Charger and Challenger were both still quintessential models in the golden era of the muscle car, and it built up a tremendous amount of equity in these nameplates. Now we're going to jump 20 years ahead and talk about a different model altogether, the Chrysler 300. The Chrysler brand itself has basically always been linked together with Dodge under the larger Chrysler Group portfolio. And because of that, throughout the history of these two brands, there have been various instances where they've basically been selling the same car, just one with a Chrysler badge and one with a Dodge badge. And in the early 2000s, the Chrysler brand was really struggling until they launched the 300. At the time, the broader Chrysler Group had intertwined ownership with Mercedes-Benz, so to develop the 300, a bunch of Chrysler engineers were able to go to Germany and basically copy Mercedes-Benz homework and then leverage technology from the Mercedes-Benz S-Class and E-Class of the time to build the 300 in the new Chrysler LX platform. It turned out to be a massive success, and the Chrysler 300 basically single-handedly saved the Chrysler brand. And in no small part, basically because it looked like a Bentley and used a chassis from a Mercedes-Benz E-Class, but cost significantly less than either of those cars. And then a few years later, when Dodge was getting ready to roll out their new full-size sedan, it would only make sense that they leveraged the Chrysler LX platform. And to Dodge's credit for continuously showing us that they are marketing geniuses, they christened this new sedan the Charger. And from the jump here, they leaned very heavily into the muscle car roots of this nameplate, using the ultra-iconic Super Bee and Daytona branding that was mostly associated with the 1960s muscle car glory. Now, Dodge had tried to use these nameplates a couple different times leading up to this new Charger, but the thing that was different this time is the car actually had the performance to live up to the name. Because a lot had changed since the 1970s when all of those regulations came out. Manufacturers had figured out how to make horsepower again, and the new Charger was available with several different Hemi V8 engines, like a 5.7 liter Hemi that made around 340 horsepower, or a 6.1 liter Hemi that made 420 horsepower. Now, the other model that we need to touch on here is the Challenger, which rolled out in 2008, and was also built on the Chrysler LX platform. This vehicle was in direct response to the 5th generation Mustang that had rolled out about 4 years earlier that featured retro styling and a powerful V8 engine, and that car had turned out to be a massive hit. So what better way for Dodge to compete than to come out with their own retro-styled modern muscle car with their own powerful V8 engine and then slap on the Challenger nameplate. And it ended up coming out just in time because Chevy would also follow suit just 2 years later when they relaunched the Camaro. And something that I really want to emphasize here with both the Charger and the Challenger is that they really weren't pretending to be sports cars. They were true muscle cars through and through, with comparably heavy curb weights, but powerful V8 engines to make up the gap. Then over the next decade, it would basically be like a second golden era for these two models. In the early 2010s, Ford would kick off the horsepower war when they launched their new GT500. A few years later, Chevy would respond in kind with their Camaro ZL1, but Dodge would really escalate things when they launched the Hellcat. Putting a 700 horsepower supercharged V8 into a car that could reasonably be purchased by the average person was an absolute game changer. Dodge would subsequently launch even higher performance versions of the Hellcat with models like the Demon and the Red Eye. Each of these different models would continue to push the envelope of performance, as well as just having really iconic, good branding. The Hellcat name itself kind of harkened back to a World War II fighter plane, and the Demon and Red Eye just kind of were sinister and oozed aggression, and this turned out to be an incredibly successful strategy. Now, while these high-performance versions of the Charger and Challenger were not actually making up the majority of sales, they played a very important role. They created a brand identity that you could directly associate with these two models, and they kind of acted as halo cars. While the Demon, Red Eye, and even just kind of the normal Hellcat might either be out of reach or just not practical for most people, there were still plenty of other flavors that you could get these two cars in. You could get the 392, you could get just the plain RT, or you could even settle for a V6 powered model. And as a result, Dodge was rewarded with some pretty good sales. The Charger was pretty consistently averaging over 80,000 units per year, and then the Challenger with an additional 60,000. Now, despite the success of these two individual models, the broader Chrysler group, now known as Stellantis, which is a massive automotive conglomerate, has been struggling. Now, there are likely a lot of reasons why Stellantis just isn't doing all that well right now, but if I kind of had to sum it up, I think it is primarily because of a focus on short-term profit at the expense of long-term stability. They failed to invest into their models to develop new technology, and as a result, the cars that they had on sale just got outdated and old. And at the same time, it seems like they might have been cutting some corners around quality control because there are now widespread recalls and major reliability concerns. And as a result, now Stellantis is raising their prices, which has just sent the entire company into a death spiral. From purely a business perspective, Stellantis, and therefore Dodge, is not doing too good. And while these larger corporate issues are ongoing, Dodge was forced to discontinue the Charger and Challenger. But of course, in true Dodge fashion, they had to milk these models for all that they were worth by coming out with a dozen special edition last call models. But for the reason that they actually had to discontinue these two different cars is just because they were getting really, really old. Remember that the 2024 model year Charger and Challenger were still being built on the Chrysler LX platform that itself came out in the early 2000s, but was really using like 1990s Mercedes-Benz technology. It's time for a serious refresh. And to be honest, if you're going to be refreshing these models, it really doesn't make sense to carry over the V8 engine. While Dodge claims that they could have continued producing the Hellcat engine for a couple more years it just wouldn't really make a ton of sense to spend all of the R&D dollars required to equip the new Charger with that old powertrain, just to then have to discontinue it a few years later. Now, you could have an entire other conversation about CAFE standards and why Stellantis was kind of put into this bind in the first place. I've actually got a whole video talking about that if you'd like to check it out. But back to the Charger, I know I've just referred to it now a few times as a refresh, but it is really a lot more than that. The new Charger is going to be a ground up redesign. That means things like a new chassis, a new body, a new interior, new powertrains. And while that all sounds great, it is a big gamble. To start off with the aesthetics of the new Charger, it very much still kind of keeps a retro vibe. And it will be offered in two different body styles, both a sedan and a two-door coupe. This basically appears to be Dodge's attempt to consolidate the Charger and Challenger into one model, and honestly, I think it might be a pretty good idea. Now, for where a lot of people are drawing issues with the new Charger is with the powertrain. As I mentioned, the old Hemi V8 is gone, as is the V6, and as of now, from what Dodge has told us, the only engine that you will be able to equip the new Charger with is the Hurricane engine, a 3-liter twin turbocharged inline 6 that is going to be making between 420 and 550 horsepower. And another change for this new car is that that power is going to be fed to all 4 wheels via Dodge's new all-wheel drive system. And lastly, for the interior, it's getting a pretty major update and it looks a lot more modern. Not a ton to say here. Now, if that was it, it would still be a massive change for the Charger, but there is still more to come. The new Charger is also going to be offered as an EV with the same 4-door or 2-door configurations. And Dodge has some tricks up their sleeve here where they're going to be pumping in synthesized sound and potentially maybe even putting rumble packs in the seat to try to simulate the experience of driving a V8 powered car. To zoom out here, I think all of this is signs of a company that is just throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall to see what sticks. Stellantis has gotten themselves in a very bad position, and they need a new, ultra successful model to pull the company out of bankruptcy. So the hope here is that they've built up enough equity in the Charger nameplate that this new model will gain the same mainstream acceptance as the outgoing cars. And while no one can say for sure if this new model will end up being successful, I think there are a few hopeful signs. For one, Dodge is not totally ditching internal combustion engines just yet. This new Hurricane engine shows a lot of promise, and I personally think it's incredibly exciting that they developed a new internal combustion engine, even if it's not a V8. And this style of engine, a turbocharged inline 6, has been tremendously successful in both European and Japanese market cars for a long time. So hopefully the Hurricane engine can basically be the American version of that. And while I am personally not yet in love with the styling of this new car, I still think it has enough retro cues that it will remind people of the old school muscle cars. One potential hurdle is that because the new Charger is no longer going to be equipped with the base engine, that old V6, all of them are going to be getting the Hurricane engine, that could kind of raise the base price to a point that it filters out some of the more economy-focused buyers. And the one absolute wild card here is going to be the EV version. A true EV sports car, or in this case, EV muscle car, has never really seen mainstream success in the US. But with this EV model likely not starting sales for at least another year, who's to say things don't change in the market between now and then? So while all of this seems like a desperate company searching for answers to try to pull themselves out of bankruptcy, which it kind of is, I think if the new Charger comes out and it is well built, it comes in at a reasonable price, Dodge is successfully able to lean into the brand's heritage, I think it might be successful and it just might save Dodge.